May it be a light for you in dark places when all other lights go out.
Hey guys, it's DCHL Devin here, and welcome to another How to Play, How to Buy video. And today we're going to go ahead and go into one of my new favorite factions, the Corsair faction. This is a new evil army. It actually used to be merged with the Harad and Umbar faction. However, now it's been separated and it's been given its own set of core troops, a very healthy array of options, and a fantastic army bonus. So you're going to find that this list has been, this army has been making the top of the charts in quite a few tournaments. I know at Nova, actually 2 years in a row now, Corsairs have been really doing well. Well, one of the years obviously with the new rules. And I know that Corsairs have been doing well even over in Britain in the Warhammer World GT, even piloted by some very accomplished players. So it is a fantastic faction, very competitive and fun to use. So I'm going to go into the pros, the cons, how to play, and how to buy this army. And let's start with the strengths. So the first thing we obviously have to mention is the heavy ranged firepower. You have crossbows and throwing weapons everywhere. The crossbows will be making up a 30-year list, which is actually more crossbows than even Isengard can bring due to cheap cost and high leadership counts with your heroes, which we'll get into in a minute. But also you have throwing knives across all your core troops. Generally your main troop you're going to field due to your army bonus is the Corsair, regular Corsair infantry, and every single one of them has a throwing knife. So you're often going to find you have about 40 throwing knives in your entire army. It's going to be absurd. Once the lines get to that throwing knife level range, you are going to absolutely pummel your opponent with firepower. The best thing about it is you're also an evil faction, which allows you a few other gimmicks with firing into combat. We'll get into that soon as well. So the next thing we got to talk about is excellent numbers. Now, this army wouldn't typically be seen as a horde army in the fact that you're an average cost troop. You're about 7 to 8 points per your basic troops, and anything specialty is going to be about 10 points. So this isn't an army that initially would see that 4-point, 5-point horde status. However, because your heroes are low cost for the amount of troops that they bring, most specifically Delgamar and Dalamer, this means that you can absolutely have a lot of men. In a traditional army of Corsairs, you're generally going to have about 50 to 60 troops. The other thing is, there's not a lot of temptation to bring in things like monsters, dragons, and trolls and such, so therefore you're just hoarding out on basic infantry all over the place. This horde is essential for the Corsair faction, and honestly, I don't think the faction works very well if it couldn't do this. So next, we get into great secondary troops. The secondary troops in this faction are pretty one-sided. They do one thing very, very well. So we have the Corsair Arbalists, which are terrible at anything other than shooting your opponent to death. Then we have the Reavers, which are great at winning fights and slaughtering your opponent, but terrible at holding a line since they can't afford to be shot at with Defense 3. And then you have the Black Numenorians, which are great at holding a line, have Defense 6, and Terror even, and in fact are one of the few models with Terror in this game for the evil ranks. You may notice Good has it all over the place with the R of Dismay and such, but Evil actually rarely has terrifying units outside of its like Mordor trolls and, you know, specialty giant beasts. Most of its core options don't get terror, so this is unique to them. The Defense 6 also allows you to be a little bit more resistant against arrow fire. With the Reavers, they also get another unique option. They get one of the few Fearless evil units in the game. Now, Fearless is mostly found in the good factions, once again, but the evil armies generally only get it through Shamans, generally get it through magic. With the exception of the Balrog and Moria Goblins, realistically, it's kind of hard to find Fearless troops in evil. And keep in mind, Berserkers, like Isengard Berserkers, actually just have a high courage value. They're not actually fearless. So this is a rarity. With all of that out the way, you also have Warhorn options. You have a lot. These guys bring in quite a healthy dose of options for you to solve most things you need in this game. The next thing you need to know about is the survivable general. So your general in this game is huge. If you have a crap general, then you're going to be finding yourself losing games. Armies like Lothlorien have this issue where like Galadriel is like very good at casting spells, but is horrible at Contest of Champions. Luckily, you not only have a very survivable general, where he is elven cloaked, he's, well, enchanted cloak, or whatever they call it. He basically can't be seen at range. He also can't be trapped. He also has a healthy fight value, heroic defense, and has quite a number of attacks and is quite lethal in combat, allowing him to be good also at Contest of Champions and various other missions. So this is actually great for your army. I highly recommend him. Then we have to get into the army bonus. Now, normally, the army bonus, I would never say that it's not worth not allying. Generally, allies are always great to bring, and I would say, for the most part, most of the armies could do without their army bonus. This is not one of them. This army loves its army bonus and definitely wants to keep it. It allows you +1 to wound when you trap an opponent. This is huge due to a lack of hitting power within the entire faction. With you using this +1 to wound, you can crush giant creatures. You never need more than a 5 to wound. This is much better than even having +5 strength. It's an absolute boon to this army to get +1 to wound across the board when trapping an opponent, especially when you're hoarding them and likely outnumber your opponent. And then, of course, the last pro of this army that I'll mention is the ability to neutralize threats in close combat. So this is something I kind of briefly talked over. It's the fact that when a monster is trying to hurl one of your men through your ranks, you can just shoot it into the combat and eliminate it. You can also shoot into combats and get rid of the heroic combat that your opposing heroes are doing. Now, normally, any evil army can do this, but most evil armies are stuck with only a third of their army being able to actually shoot. In this case, you have that option across your entire army for the most part, which allows you flexibility in the game. So with all those fantastic strengths, let's get into the weaknesses, because there are unfortunately quite a few of those. And the first one we got to mention is low defense. True to form of a horde army, you have a very low defense value of generally 4, but sometimes even 3, depending on the units you pick, and this crushes you. So just keep that in mind. If you don't obliterate your opponent at range, you're often going to find that close combat is going to be a nightmare for you. The next thing is no cavalry options. With the exception of Morgul Knights, Black Numenorian Marshals, you actually don't have Morgul Knights. You have the Black Numenorian Marshals that would normally lead them. They are your only cavalry option, realistically. You do have the Knight of Umbar on Fell Beast. Technically, that is another option. And while I certainly would, in some circumstances, use it, maybe at 1,000 points, I think the Knight of Umbar is by far the worst Ring Wraith of all the named ones, and so not a fantastic option for you to use. So this is just some fortunate little thing, and it's just my opinion, of course, on it. The Bosuns are a crutch in the army. So you're going to be tempted to have Bosuns because they are banners, and also because they do hold the Reavers in check. However, every time you buy them, generally you're going to need 1 or 2 of them, let's say. They do lower the amount of might, and also because they're a crutch for your Reavers, most people tend to target them, and if they do, your Reavers can risk like killing your own army. So just keep in mind, you do have a crutch unit. Specialty troops only do one thing well and suck at everything else, so, you know, that's obviously something to mention. There's no real way to spam your specialty troops, like Gondor spams Fountain Court Guard, Rohan will spam their Royal Guard. This army really doesn't want to spam its specialty troops all that much, and it just limits flexibility is all. So let's get into how to play this army. With all those pros and cons out the way, there are a variety of different ways we can play this army, depending on the specialty troops you pick. But let's go with the core one just for right now. So the big thing you're going to need to know is how to use your crossbows, because that is really going to make or break your army. The tendency for a lot of newer players is just to lump all of the crossbows into a single warband, put them off to the side, and then just make them fire in the ranks as your regular army moves forward. The problem with this is by the time the lines engage, your crossbows are not doing anything, which is a third of your army just standing around or trying to make their way to the battle. Remember, you need your backstabber rule to kick in, which means you need these crossbowmen to help you trap models. If you're outnumbering, that is the way you win battles. So what you're instead going to want to do is sprinkle your crossbows into different warbands. We actually have a player named Rainier Lee. He's actually used crossbows quite effectively doing this using a shoot and scoot method, or a suppressing fire as he likes to call it. So essentially, while one group of archers is holding the line and not moving, the other group of archers is moving forward into a new position to pressure your opponent into more of a checkmate style position. So you're also going to find that gun lines don't work with this army unless the objective calls for it. So if it's hold ground and you need to capture the center, don't feel tempted to just stand around 24 inches away from the objective and just shooting at your opponent. You need to get in there, because the problem is by the time a lot of these scenarios end, you'll have destroyed your opponent off, but they'll have all these scenario objectives or whatever it is they need to do. And it's just really not going to work. You're going to find a lot of missions favor mobility. So don't get too tempted to just stand and shoot in every single mission. Some of them, like to the death, obviously, yes, standing and shooting is probably the way to go. So with the composition of your force, another thing to mention is that you should have probably no more than 4 spears per warband. I mean, you can do a 6 and 6 style with your 12-man warbands, but generally we found that you should focus more on outnumbering your opponent versus trying to bump heads with your opponent in a battle line. You're not really going to win that fight as often, but by surrounding them, that means every time you win a fight, you're likely to kill them because you're not only doubling your dice, you're getting +1 to wound on top of that. So you definitely need to swarm around. Like I said, bring your Arbalists into the fight and swarm your opponent. Try to wrap around the flanks. Using your Hashirin or Dalamer or Delgamar to punch through into points and allow your army to trap from within. This is how you're going to win with the Corsairs. So you don't really need to focus on battle lines, is all I'm getting at. Like, that's an area where other armies excel and will start to beat you, even despite your fight 4. So next, shields on everybody. Put the shields on them. Strength 3 crushes you in this game if you are Defense 3. So this is the reason that Corsair Reaver spamming is not as effective. It's one of the reasons that it's not as effective. They're more of, like I said, a specialty troop, but you definitely don't want your core army being Defense 3 if you can avoid it. The next thing is shooting into combats in order to avoid shenanigans. This is something I touched on previously. This is something you definitely want to learn how to do. Keep a couple guys always kind of where they're in a shooting position if you notice as your opponent is able to do slingshot maneuvers and hurls through your ranks. Hurls will hurt you given your low defense value. So you definitely want to make sure you have a contingency plan where you can operate in the shoot phase to disable whatever it is your opponent's trying to do. The next thing is if you can move back and shoot. If you're playing the whole gun line range, try to actually map out how far your opponent actually is. How many moves away are they? And see if you can get that extra turn of shooting. This is something that you're probably naturally going to want to do even as a beginning player. But in games like To the Death and such, you do want to force your opponent to come to you and try to maximize that firepower. And it's just good for me to just mention that. Corsair Captains, something to keep a note about them. They are Fight 5. Which makes them excellent at taking down heroes. Even like most of your named characters are actually Fight 5 and below. So they actually are surprisingly effective in making it where your opponent needs to do a heroic strike. If you have a Corsair captain in a fight with a hero, even if he's at 0 might, and you're surrounding that hero, they're going to feel extremely tempted to call heroic defense, heroic strike, whatever it takes to not lose that fight because that Fight 5 is tying them, and that can definitely cause problems. So I would absolutely recommend Corsair captains as much as possible. And as far as Black Numenorians, I actually think that they're good at advancing and holding a front rank for you. Once again, that terror option does create kind of a buffer zone, but it's really that defense 6. That is their bread and butter. Obviously, the opponent can shoot past them, but you're going to find that that is helpful when you have an army of defense 4 that really can't handle being shot at. As far as the Reavers, if you really, really want to horde with these guys, generally I've found that you're probably going to need to ally. And that sucks because the Reavers get +2 to wound when they don't ally. But the problem is Maelstrom missions. Because you have a 2 in 12 chance of getting a Maelstrom mission, you could get screwed by a bad Maelstrom deployment. I've often found that Gurritz and the Shadow Lord is very helpful because you obviously can't mitigate the defense 3 in this case, so you definitely need to survive shooting, and you can't shoot at all, which means you are moving towards your opponent. So one Rohan opponent will obliterate you as they move and shoot. If you fight Rivendell Knights, you are going to be miserable chasing them around the map. So I would recommend avoiding taking too many Reavers. If you do that, then if you take the Shadow Lord to avoid the whole shooting shenanigans, then get him on a Fell Beast so that way you have some flexibility to dehorse models. Just keep that in mind. Hoarding Reavers, while a fun idea, probably doesn't work. I would say you can take 12, 15 of them and hoard that way, but I wouldn't do your entire army with it. At least that's from my experience. Let me know, of course, if you've had a different one. Now, as far as allies, we have to go into them. We're going to cover really a historical ally because I'll be honest, I wouldn't give up this bonus under most conditions. And the historical ally you have is all you're ever going to need. First off, Suladan is amazing. Not going to lie, I would take Suladan over Dalamer any day of the week. In fact, a lot of my Corsair lists, I just pick Suladan and nothing else, like he'll lead a contingent of men, but I don't really need to get all the other stuff from Harad. So Suladan is honestly what you need. And with Suladan, you can bring 50% bows, allowing you to keep your maximization of firepower. Haradrim are already very cheap. You get the poisoned arrows, so they're very offensively powerful, and you can also sprinkle a little bit of cavalry. This is where I would recommend 3 cavalry, maybe 4, in order to accomplish a lot of those reconnoiter missions, maybe accompany Suladan, but Suladan is excellent. 6-inch banner, he counts as a banner, fight 5 with heroic strike, excellent hitting power, poison swords and such. Like he's actually a pretty amazing hero, and in my mind, one of the best evil heroes for his points. So I definitely would bring him along, and I think he's a solid general. If you're lucky enough to have both Suladan and Dalimer, then I would pick Dalimer as your general, not Suladan. And the reason why is because you're going to want Suladan to be in situations where he will most likely get wounded and die, whereas Dalimer is a lot more survivable. So I would actually say that. Now, I know it's tempting to say, oh, well, he's got the banner, so of course I would keep him in the back. But trust me, when he's on horse, you're going to be tempted to just launch him into combat. So it's just going to be how you're going to want to feel about it, and you should. So let's go into the how to buy section of this video. It's the last part of it. And so we're looking at packs of Corsairs are 24 men. And you only need 2 of them for a full army of 48. And that's really it. You're done at that point. $46 is all you're really going to need for one of these. So 2 of them, you're pretty much hitting into the $90 range. So we're not really looking at that much money left. So what can we get in order to lead 48 men? And this is where I think 1 pack of Black Numenorians is all you need. See, the cool part is Black Numenorians is about $26 for 4 of them. And what they allow you to do is use them as Black Numenorian marshals. Now, obviously, I never mentioned them that much in this whole video. I do think the Corsair captains are great for their cost effectiveness, but Black Numenorian marshals are not bad. They are also fight 5, or terrifying, have defense 7. They're actually pretty solid heroes. I'd mount them if I could, but obviously if we're trying to buy this as for cheap as possible and just get into the game, then a pack of 4 Black Numenorians is really the way to go. If you want to spend a little more money, you could probably get the Black Numenorian mounted counterparts, the Morgul Knights, and use those as your marshals. So you'll just have a lot of marshals at that point. It probably won't be the most effective way to play the army, but it is still effective. So after that, you can start with the captains. As you kind of trend, I'll get the captains pack. They are 2 Corsair captains for $26. I think that's an excellent bargain. Or, I'm sorry, maybe not. I believe it's actually the bosun and a captain. So they actually combined them recently. As of the shooting this video, you guys can obviously flex this. This is after you've done the 4 Black Numenorians and all the Corsairs. This army is actually easy to find on eBay. It was unfortunately thrown away in droves back in the day. So you could probably find them all over the place. They were in plentiful supply. They weren't that as good before this edition happened. If you find a Hasharan, which is also easy to find, and that's very easy to proxy for Dalimer, that'll save you the money of just buying Dalimer outright. And they honestly look similar enough and honestly have very similar abilities, so it shouldn't be confusing. If you really want, you can also use, let's say you want to get the Black Numenorians, you can also get Army of the Dead and just paint them up like Black Numenorians. A lot of people actually think they look better than the Black Numenorians. In fact, I kind of do as well. They're plastic, and they will be a much cheaper way to get Black Numenorian armies, and I think a lot of people could appreciate them. So just don't paint them ghostly. Instead, get them like, raggedy clothing and everything. People used to use these as the Barbarians of Carndum in War of the Ring. So this is actually not a new thing at all. This is something very normal. As far as the bowmen, now every time you buy a pack of Reavers, you're going to get some bowmen that accompany them. Just convert them into Reavers. They already have this pose that you can kind of, just give them 2 swords and now they're Reavers. So are you ever going to use your bowmen? Probably. I mean, obviously when you start off, you won't have any Arbalists, so you could just, either proxy them as Arbalists, which is a little trickier because they don't look like Arbalists, or you can just use them as straight up bowmen and just take advantage of that style shooting. I mean, they're not terrible archers. But as you progress and get your actual Arbalists, then you convert those bowmen to Reavers, because honestly, you're probably never going to use your bowmen after that point, unless you just really want to span out the throwing knives, which is not a terrible idea. So Anyway, that is all I've got for you as far as this how to play, how to buy video. So what do you guys think? Please like and subscribe. I will be getting out as many of these videos as possible as I continue to play these armies. And I will talk to you all very soon.